Hi, I'm Jill Bernard from Huge Theater in the United States, and I would like to know more about improv that is not in the United States. So I'm making a video series of interviews in which I talk to one person in another country to at least get one point of view on how improv started in their home country. I asked Raffi Feghali to tell me how improv started in Lebanon.
So improv, the way we know it as the improvisers, has a very peculiar story in Lebanon. Like in Lebanon, we had to reinvent the wheel, even though we know that the wheel existed. So in any city in the world, you want to learn improv, you just go to an improv school and you learn it. In Lebanon, I'll tell you how we got to that. But when we realized that improv existed, there was no one teaching it. So we had to teach ourselves. I'll tell you all the stories coming in a few minutes as well, but we had to teach ourselves, we had to reinvent the wheel, and it had a good side and a bad side, all right? So the bad side was that we were already inventing something that was already invented. That was the bad side of it. And we couldn't, for example, it all, for us, it started in 2009, and we couldn't pick up where improv was in the world in 2009. We had to start a little bit earlier, then make a sprint to where the world is in 2009, and then start being up to date with what the world is doing. So that's another problem, is that there was no point of reference. I mean, some people, of course, knew whose line, they knew what improv is, but those were like the very few people who, because, for example, people in Lebanon are very educated, they are very open to Western and other, not just Western and Eastern cultures and what these cultures have to offer. So we would get on our TVs things that were happening in the East and the West, and of course in Lebanon and the region, but whose line specifically was not that kind of a show that was very successful. So people would not everyone would watch it. Very few people would actually go on to look for shows that we didn't get here, and they would look them up and they would try to watch them, so they knew what it was. But those were very few. And it wasn't even put in a theatrical backdrop for them. It was a TV thing for them, so there was all that. And as I said, so we knew that improv existed by mistake in 2009. I was part of a group and we were doing traditional, I mean, I've been doing theater way before I was doing improv. I still do theater that is not improv, but we were doing like normal theater workshop. And actually, it was specifically a Stanislavski workshop. And Stanislavski talks about improv in some places, but not the improv that we do. He talks about the improv that you do to prepare a character or to prepare a scene, or sometimes you improvise what happened before the scene or what happened after the scene. What would this character do if he was taking a coffee in the cafe where that doesn't appear in the script? Those kinds of improv hypothetical exercises. And when we got to that part, which was the last part of our course, we thought, you know what, why don't we do these things, these exercises in the street? So we were doing street theater, but that was improvised. It wasn't dialogue improvised. It was more like we were improvising tableaus, like we would interact with the people. We would do a tableau on a very beautiful backdrop, because in Lebanon we have very nice sceneries that we could use as backdrops for these tableaus that we were doing. So, and then we would interact with the audience, like you are doing this tableau with your fellow actors, and then some audience member would come in and be curious, and then you would integrate that in it. So it was that kind of thing. And then this was in 2000, and I mean between, I think, 2007, 8, all the way to between 2007 and 2008. And then we started doing some research online, and we found that these can be shows. We didn't know how to do them, but we got invited to the Amsterdam Festival in 2009, and we didn't know what that was. We thought it was what we were doing, and we went there. It was snowing, and we couldn't do our street theater thing. We had to do something indoors, and we had no idea what we were doing. So we watched a few shows before us, and we thought, wait a second, these people are improvising full shows with like dialogue, and this is not what we're doing. I don't know if we can do what we do in a closed theater. I don't know if it works. And we tried. I mean, we sucked big time. Like, I think people who watched us then still remember how bad we were, because we weren't doing improv. We were doing what we thought is improv. We didn't even know why we were in that festival. Like years after that, like even I've been doing this for what now? Like since then, and still now, for me, like the festival in Amsterdam is something of high quality. If I go there, I don't know if I will ever get accepted to go there. And we got accepted doing that. So it was a little bit weird for us to get accepted to start with, but then we did. So we went there, and then we had the capacity, or we had the opportunity to actually attend all the workshops as people who were performing in the festival. And that is where the big aha moment fell upon us. We're like, oh, wait a second. These people do this for a living. It's actually their thing. Just like we do theater for a living, they do this for a living. Oh, they teach it. They have a method to teach it. Oh, wait, it actually has many different forms. It's a whole world in itself. And this is where I was like, oh, okay, now we know what we're doing. Now all we have to do is bring this to Lebanon. So when we came back, we wanted to do it properly. We wanted to start doing the shows properly, the way improv is happening all over the world. But unfortunately, the group I was with did not have that facility. They didn't have the time to actually come to rehearsals. They didn't have the interest in doing improv that way. They were happy with what they were doing, which is depending on their own, whatever they were born with, whatever skills they were born with, and playing on what the game has to offer. So if the game had something funny to offer, they would capitalize on that. And this is how it was happening. And it was a lot of directed improv. Those were the shows. So they didn't want to do that. So then what happened is I split from the group. I said, this is good what you're doing, but I want to do proper improv, or at least what I thought was proper improv, what I saw as proper improv in the festival. And I gathered a few people from the actors I know, and we started rehearsing games that we'd find online. This was when I took my first loan from the bank to actually buy every single improv book that was ever published up until that point. There weren't many. In 2009, 2010, yeah. There weren't many. So I was able to buy all of them for a few $1,000s. I don't remember. But so I bought all the books. I spent a lot of time. I was very serious about it. I don't know if now I would do something like that. I don't know what kind of Raffi was doing that back then. So I started reading every single book, doing every single exercise. So I had the challenge that you mentioned earlier, which is I had no reference. So I was telling professional actors or amateur actors, but I was telling actors that what we are trying to do is we are trying to do just like the shows we're doing, but it's all made up, it's all improvised. And because they haven't seen anything like that, it was very difficult for me to do it. But still, we were still training, we were still doing the exercise in the books. And a year after that, we realized you cannot learn improv from books. So and all the time I was also looking in the Arab world. I was looking in our history if anyone has tried that before. So I learned about this one performance where a director we had, what he did was he came across these theater games, Viola Spolin probably, or Keith Johnston, but I think it was Spolin because in Spolin's books the games are more clear, and in Keith's books it's more like the theory and then some games, and the theory and then some games. But then Spolin had books that were filled with just games. So there was this director who I think in 2006 or 2005 he tried a performance that was game based, but that was just a one-hit thing. The actors were not trained on improv; they were normal theater actors, and it was just an experiment. So I learned that was the only attempt we had on that. And then I realized, okay, so that was the only attempt. I have no one else to help us with this. The books are not working. I don't have a reference to help my actors know what we're trying to do. I need to bring someone from abroad. I need to bring an improviser to help. And in the festival in 2009, I had met Tim Orr, the 3 for All shows. Actually, the 3 for All show was my inspiration. It was the closing show of the festival. I was sitting in the very front row on one of those puff bags. And it was before they're doing it now in the company theater. They were doing it in Crea. No, not Crea. Crea was a workshop space. They were doing it in Rosen Theater, which is now for Boom Chicago. So I was sitting in the very front on one of those puff bags. Like I was like, these guys told me they're gonna do like one story, one full play, all improvised. They're lying to me. I want to sit in the front and catch them on their lies. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to expose those people. Finally, this Arab guy came all the way from Beirut to expose you. And here I am. I'm here to expose you, So that's what I did. I sat in the very front on these puff bags and I'm watching and I'm in awe. I was in shock. You know how up until now, every time I'm doing a workshop or a performance, my dream is to recreate in the audience the feeling I felt in that show, where I was able to see everything they did. They were using this limousine. I could see it. I could see its color. They had this big castle they were performing in, so I could see the staircase that they were using. I could see the balconies. I could see everything in excruciating details. You know, like when that show was over and I had to come back to life, you know, it was a big shock to me. All of this was in this black, empty theater. I couldn't believe it. You know, it was, and I remember very well. I was sitting in that very front on the actually on the ground of the theater because it was a ramp, and I was sitting there and I could feel the claps of the standing ovation from behind me, like hitting me on my back from behind me. And I knew like these are now my friends. I attended all their workshops. This was the last day of the festival. I became very good friends with them. And I knew that I had to be also standing up and clapping for them. But the message was not going from my brain to my body. I couldn't. I was in shock. I was sitting there. My mouth, I don't remember, but my mouth probably opened all the way to the ground. My tongue probably out. And I was like, what just happened? What did I just experience? You know? And this was what made me realize this is what I need to take back to Beirut, not what we're doing, not the games we're doing. I need to take this back to Beirut. And this is when I tried, as I said, you know, bought the books, we rehearsed for a year. We still didn't feel confident enough to put it on stage. So this is where I took my second loan from the bank, and I brought Tim to train us. So I brought Tim here, and with Tim we did I think we probably Tim would tell the story better, but I feel we treated him like a slave or something. He was working 10 hours a day for 10 days in a row. We did like 100 hours of improv in 10 days. And then we even launched our first show ever in English because Tim was playing with us on stage. So that was our first ever proper long, and it was also, I was insisting that it had to be like a long form, one full story. And that's what we did. We did like this one long form and a proper theater. We didn't have improv clubs. We still don't have improv clubs. So it was a proper theater. And that's one of the good things. I will tell you about why it was good to be late in the game. But so this is what we did. We did the show, and ever since then, we did a weekly 1 hour story every single week since then for a full year. And we kept bringing Tim back once a year. So we kept rehearsing in between, and we bring Tim back. We say, hey, we rehearsed, but we're stuck probably somewhere. Fix that. You know, make us, you know, break through that ceiling that we went through. And I kept bringing him at least once a year for maybe 4 or 5 years. And the first time we did a short form was 5 years later. A very peculiar story. Every troupe in the world starts with short form, and then they move into long form. We started with long form, and we still have trouble doing short form. We still have trouble ending short scenes. You know, it's crazy. So because it wasn't part of our vocabulary, it wasn't part of our alphabet. Our alphabet was long stories, and then we had to learn how to do shorter stories. So so this is how it started, and now so that was my group. I started a group. There was the other group that I left. So there were 2 improv groups in Lebanon back then. Now I think there's still 2 groups, but now I mean in 2017 I quit the group that I started. They are still doing improv very well. It's a very well-run group. I love their work. I watch them whenever I'm here, whenever I can. I watch them. They're doing a great job. But now I'm also doing my own thing because I started touring much more. So I wanted to give time to touring, and the group was not ready to tour in the terms of resources, whether they had jobs, and sometimes, you know, we go to these festivals, we pay our own money, and then we hope to make the money there. Not many people wanted to take that risk. So so I had to stop working with the group and start my own thing. So now there is still that group is running. They're doing very good improv work. There's the other group. They're not doing improv anymore. They just exist by name, the initial group I started with. And there's me. And then there are some people who now incorporate more improv in their work. Like they aren't properly improv groups, but they incorporate improv in their groups. Some people do just workshops. They don't do performances because we don't have improv clubs, because yeah, it's expensive to do an improv show here. I will tell you now also why, and that's one of the good things. So in a nutshell, this has been the history of improv in Lebanon. So at the beginning, it was difficult because people are used to theater, and they thought they were coming to watch a normal theater play, and then they were surprised by that. So for about 2 years, people and reviews, newspapers, etc., they kept calling it some sort of experimental theater. That's how they could understand it, because that's the reference they have is theater. And as a matter of fact, that was a good thing for me. I think in Lebanon we still, I think maybe in the last couple of years before the pandemic was the first time when we did improv shows in clubs. All the time before that, improv shows were a theater thing. They only happened in theaters, and I loved that. There was the respect of the theater for it. There was the discipline of the theater for it. It was treated as theater. The improvisers were treated as actors. And even in my groups, we did performance training. Many people came from theater backgrounds, but those who didn't, we did performance training because we were using a theater. You know, we weren't just doing like, how do you answer this? How are you witty? How do you make this funny? Or there was none of that. It was all about the story. The story was the nucleus of our work, and the performance. You know, like people were trained on being very good performers, very good actors, the voice, the body, how they use their body, the whole shebang of being a theater performer was being trained. And then we also had some training on the director's eye. How do you see the show? How do you see the show from outside? Because you're also being a director. So because we never had directed improv, we didn't like directed improv, we didn't do it. So we were directing our own shows as performers as we were doing it. So we were always training that outside eye to have to see the stage picture, how to use the stage better, how to make it like a proper performance. So this is one of the good things about it. Actually, I remember two good things about it. The first one is we didn't fall in the same problems that Europeans and Americans fell into, because you know how improv is very real and human, and it has the tendency to bring in the good things that we bring in as humans, but also the bad things. So if in our society, we, for example, don't give women a lot of chance to appear, that probably happens in improv. So we had to avoid that from the get-go. We always made sure that we had at least half of the company or half of the people performing were women, to make sure to create that trend and not to fall into the future trend of making the copying the social ways that women are treated. You know, we wanted to break that. We want to make it different. So I think for that time, for 2009, 2010, 11, 12, and going forward, I think we were much better when it comes to diversity than Europe and the US. Diversity on stage, of course. Our laws are still shit. The way we treat women outside the theater is still shit, but at least in the theater, it was much better than what they were doing in Europe and the States. So this was the first good thing about it. The second good thing about it that I love a lot is that because also we saw how improv took a turn towards gag improv, we were able to avoid that. We were able to say gag improv is a nice thing. If you want to do it, you can do it, but that's not what we do. You know, we do story-based theater. We do improv that gives a depth and a weight for the story. You are watching a play that's a normal play. The only difference is that you are making this up right now in front of you. There was nothing prepared, but it has to have the same value as a normal play. So this was also something we put in our training. We kept it there from the get-go. So the discipline, the focus on the story more than the funny, more than the comedy was there. And I love that. And I always say, you know, you watch improv as an audience member. I feel that we watch improv on two layers. You are watching the process and the content at the same time. Yeah. And I always say the process is always going to be funny. So don't worry about comedy. People are going to laugh watching you make this shit up. You know, they're going to laugh watching you fail. That is already the comedy in it. So why don't you focus that your content be a very good story? Then you get the best of both worlds. You know, you get maybe the drama or the science fiction or the romance or whatever genre you're playing. And the comedy is always there. Don't worry about it. And this is how we focus that when we're working on content, we're working on dialogue, working on creating the story, we're focusing on the story. And we also started putting some, just like normal theater, some better physicalization in our work. So the body was also telling a story, the tableaus of the actors were telling a story. So all of this was taken into consideration and was at the center of our work. And this is why I like that we came late to the game. You know, this is one of the things, the two of the things that I like about it. And also another thing that came by itself after 10 years of work was the fact that, you know, the Middle East is a very political place. It is a very hot place in conflicts and politics and everything. And our improv could not, even if we tried, could not be political. The fact that we're standing on a stage talking to people, the second we go out to introduce our show, when we say hello in Lebanon or in the Middle East, that is a political statement, you know? So since we knew that that's already political, we started putting some social issues and politics in our work from the get-go. So that was also something that made our improv special, and that eventually, I didn't see this in the beginning, but later on I saw this. And this is one of the things I also liked about our improv and about what made our improv, or also coming late to the game, what made that a good thing and a special thing.
But Three for All does a lot of, they do stories with a genre laid on top.
Yeah.
And the genres they pick are very linked to the United States, like very through the history of cinema, because they're movie buffs, but also theater styles from
and the film noir style that they do. Yeah.
Yeah. Does there, when you watch improv in Lebanon, do you see any styles that make it particularly from Lebanon, or is it romance, sci-fi, all the things we would see in the United States?
So it's a mix of both. It's a mix of both. Of course, the art form is built in a way to accommodate for those genres more than ours, you know. So those have to be there. But also there is a lot of bringing in the way we do theater in Lebanon. This is why I said there's a lot of physicalization, because our theater works with the body a lot. So we have the body in it. We have the stage picture that is very important for us. The lighting, we give the lighting a very important role. So the person who's doing the lighting and the music, they are usually improvisers. We don't bring a musician or a light person to do the lights. We bring improvisers and teach them music and lights to accompany us. Yeah, and that's very important for us. So because with the lighting, also the lighting person is playing an outside view of a director sometimes, even though they're not directing, but they are playing with what the lighting can do and with the theatricality of the show. So I think what makes our improv different is the fact that it's very theatrical. It is not a pub or a club or a mini theater kind of thing. It is a theatrical thing. You're going to watch a theatrical play. So I think this is the influence of Lebanese theater on improv. So I have a couple of shows when I tour. I have a show called Be My Guest, which started when I started touring. The Syrian conflict was in its peak, more or less. The refugee problem all over the world was big, and I was touring a lot in Europe. And in Europe, especially, the refugee problem was big. And I wanted to do a very light European improv show. But being the Lebanese person I am, I couldn't do it without some politics to it. So Be My Guest is what Europeans think is a light improv show, but for me, it's a very political show where a theater is hosting me. So I return the favor and I host one of their players. And what we do is we start by storytelling. So every one of us tells a story around the theme of hospitality. When was a time when you had guests over, and in your culture, how do you do that? How do you receive guests? You know, and we tell a story like that. I tell a story from my country, and then my fellow partner would tell a story from her or his country, and then one of the audience members, and hopefully they would be someone from a different culture than these two, would tell a third story. And then we use these stories to improvise short scenes, like to inspire us into short fictional scenes from that. So this was Be My Guest. This was the show where you know, I am a guest, but also the performer is the guest on my show, and the audience member and their story is acknowledged, and they are a guest on our show. And then we play some short scenes around that. So this is one of the shows, Be My Guest. Another show which I started not a long time ago, and I started that by by mistake. I started that because I had to, not my mistake, but more out of necessity. I was on tour, and my last stop was in Riga, and the person who was organizing my show sends me. I was on the first stop of my tour. I don't know, maybe I was in Amsterdam. I don't know where I was. I was somewhere in Europe, and then I get a message from Riga saying that the partner I was going to play with is not is going to be out of the country, and I'm very reluctant when it comes to the partners I'm playing with, because I think improv is a language, and if someone is speaking a different language, that can break the show. It doesn't work. So I was very sure that the partner I'm playing with, at least, it's not because they were better than anyone else. It's just that they spoke my language. Like when I say, I don't know, the basic. When I say foundation, you know what we're talking about. When I say, as simple as that. So, and also her English was better than most of the others. So that also made things easier. So she was not going to be there, and I felt, this is a pickle. Now I need to find someone else. And there were some amazing players at Riga, but either the language was a problem, or the language as in the English, or the improv language. Both. One of these two was a problem. So I sent her back, and I said, listen, it's not going to work. I mean, I cannot think of it. If you can think of anyone, tell me, but I cannot think of anyone. And we kept going back and forth until finally she told me, you know what, we're going to have to do this show alone. And the second I read that, I felt maybe that was the most scared I've ever been in my life. For me, for me, improv is the epitome of collaboration. It is the epitome of playing with a partner. I've seen a few solo shows in my festivals. I've seen you have a solo show. I've seen your show in Dubai. I've seen a few solo shows, and for me, that was like the most difficult thing in the world. I could never imagine myself doing that. And the way I see improv is a very collaborative thing. The magic of improv for me is when these two people, or three or four, are creating a story that is not owned by any of them, but owned by both of them at the same time. I always say, if we are two people on stage, then we automatically are a third entity, and that third entity is who's writing the story. And when I was alone, I couldn't imagine that second entity or that third entity. I felt like, no, I'm doing a story alone. I cannot do that. It's crazy. So she was convinced I'm doing it alone. I kept saying no until at the end I realized I have to do it alone. And I had maybe 5 or 6 stops in that tour before I got to Riga. And the whole time I couldn't focus on any of the shows because I was worried about the Riga show. It was going to be my first solo show, and I was that scared about it the whole tour. But then I did it. It was a very, very bad show. Your first solo show. It was one of the worst shows I've ever done in my life. So I learned that it was very difficult firsthand, even though I believed it cognitively. No, then my whole body had to believe it. That was a very bad show. But another thing I got out of that show was that it's actually doable. I didn't believe it was doable until I did it. So when I did it, I felt it's difficult. I'm going to suck for the first 30, 40 years of doing it. But eventually, I'm going to get one show that's good. So then I started touring with that solo show. It's called Al-Hakawati, which in Arabic means the storyteller. And it's the story of this traditional storyteller, like the traditional storyteller we had here, and who used to come to our cafes and tell stories, and ended with a cliffhanger for people to come back the next day and drink more tea and listen to more stories. So that was the whole idea of it. So Al-Hakawati was the storyteller who came to this place to tell stories, but it so happened that these stories are all improvised, and sometimes I break out of the Hakawati character into the characters of the story, and I start playing them. So that's another story, another show I tour with. And the last show I started touring with before Corona put us under house arrest was a show inspired, because in 2019, and at the end of 2019, I think, or was it 18? So I think 2019. At the end of 2019, we had a revolution started in Lebanon. The Lebanese people went to the streets, all of them, and we stayed there for a long time. And I had a show inspired by that revolution. So my longtime partner in Beirut, I thought, you know what, maybe we should start touring together and taking this show abroad. And we did a show called, but I also kept it a little bit flexible to have guests as well if needed. So this show was called This is Beirut. And this is a story, and it's a radio show. So the radio show is called This is Beirut. And you have a host and the guest. And then we are interviewing this guest. So the audience decides, first of all, they decide two things. They decide who is the guest and the host among the two actors they're seeing on stage. And then they decide what is the guest and who is the guest, you know? Why is the host interviewing the guest? And in the process of interviewing this guest, the stories he's telling from his life, we start seeing them come to life. We start acting them out. So we are jumping between the radio show and the stories he's telling back and forth. So it's actually a long form. It is one interview, but this interview has many short stories, independent short stories. So it's a mix between some short stories and a long form. And this is the show that didn't tour enough. I mean, we did maybe 2 shows. We did maybe one in Beirut, one in Istanbul, and then Corona put us under this thing we're in now, and it stopped. But I'm hoping to take it back on the road once things get back to whatever they're going back to. So these are the shows I'm touring with these days.
Oh, I can't wait till we're back and I can see these shows. It sounds
yes,
wonderful.
Me too. Yes.
I want to thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been a delight. I learned so much. Everyone's going to love watching this video. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I was so happy to also be given the opportunity to share our story, to share, how we got here. Also to share about what the kinds of shows we do, or I do even. And I'll be looking forward also to see the people who are watching this maybe in one of the shows. Yeah.